Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to episode 17 of the JFK assassination 60 years later. When we left off in episode 16, we were talking about Dino Brugioni, the famous photo analyst who worked there at the CIA, man of tremendous credentials, most likely the greatest photo analyst in the history of that particular line of work. He was involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis, published several books, and if you look him up on Wikipedia, you'll see this guy was an all-star when it comes to photo analysts. We were focusing in on the headshot that Dino Brugioni had seen in the original Zapruder film. You'll recall that when Douglas Horne showed him the extant film, the film that purports to be the original, the one that you see today online and Oliver Stone's movie JFK and so forth, that he looked at that film and said, no, that's not the film I saw. And the film he saw had this huge cone of brain tissue and blood shooting straight up, which was really coming from the back of President Kennedy's head through that massive exit-sized hole that all those witnesses at Parkland as well as Bethesda had witnessed. And he said it was this just striking thing, and you can imagine, because you're watching this film, you're not hearing any gunshot wounds at all, because there's no sound on this film. You're just watching the film, and all of a sudden he sees this gigantic cone, and he says it was the most striking thing, and obviously it would be. And he said we kept watching it over and over again, together with these two men who purportedly were Secret Service agents who were selecting the frames to be blown up by Brugioni's team and then placed on briefing boards. Now let me emphasize a couple of things here before we get started. And the first thing is that when I talk about an altered film, that they altered the film, I want to make it clear, and I think I already did that, but I just want to emphasize it, that we're not talking about altering the original Zapruder film. That's impossible. You can't delete frames and then splice it back together. It would never work. That's not what I mean when I say there's an altered film or they altered the film. What I want to make clear is that we're talking about making a copy, a very high quality copy. Remember, they use that special machine called an optical printer. They make a highly sophisticated first class quality copy off the optical printer that looks like an original, and that's what they alter. That's where they delete the frames and they rearrange it and they paint over things and they make that into a perfect new original that comes out in 16 millimeter format, but then they can splice it down the middle, and now it's 8 millimeter, the same 8 millimeter that Abraham Zapruder ended up with. But in this case, as you recall, they brought it down back to Nitpick on Sunday night, in the Sunday night operation, in a 16 millimeter format, which confirms that it has to be a copy. Because as you'll recall, there was no way that you can take an 8 millimeter film and convert it into a 16 millimeter by putting the two halves that you've slit down the middle back together. Now, the other thing I want to emphasize is that this difference between Kodak and Hawkeye, which was part of the Kodak facility, the Hawkeye building, kind of common knowledge, with the CIA's operation that was located there in Kodak's research and development plant that was called Hawkeyeworks. Now, that word, Hawkeyeworks, was top secret, totally classified. It was all part of this top secret operation there at this Kodak Research and Development Center. Now, let me emphasize that there's no evidence that has ever surfaced that Kodak was involved in any aspect of the Zapruder film alteration. In fact, I think it's a virtual certainty that they would not have gotten him involved. Remember that this took place on a Sunday. Dino Brugioni's team meets on Saturday night. They've got the original film. They do the copies and the blow-ups and the briefing boards, and then the two people who are purportedly Secret Service agents then take the film away. And they obviously go to Rochester on Sunday, or the wee hours of Saturday night, early Sunday morning. And so to me, it's a virtual certainty they would not have gotten anybody involved in Kodak in this, because obviously this is a top secret and very critically important operation that's taking place here. You're altering a film, or creating the altered copy of the film involving the assassination of the president. And it's like the autopsy. Once you determine that they have done these shenanigans with the film, it's case closed. You see, you automatically have concluded that the national security establishment orchestrated and carried out this assassination, because like the fraudulent autopsy, there is no innocent explanation for a fraudulent film. And so clearly they would not have wanted outsiders to see what they were doing. So they go to their Hawkeyeworks division on Sunday, when obviously Kodak's not operating and so forth. It was undoubtedly all CIA personnel that create this altered copy. Then they bring it back later Sunday so they can go to Homer McMahon's team on Sunday night in that other compartmentalized operation to make these new blow-ups and new briefing boards and so forth. So the reason I keep saying that these individuals are purportedly Secret Service agents is because I don't believe it. I don't believe for a moment that the two agents that brought the film in the first place, when it was diverted from Chicago over to Nitpick, Dino Brugioni's team on Saturday night, that they were Secret Service agents. They said they were Secret Service agents, but we all know that the CIA operates undercover. And so to me, it's a virtual certainty that these were CIA officials operating under the cover of being Secret Service agents. Also, on the Sunday night operation, where the Secret Service agent who identifies himself as Bill Smith and comes in and says, well, okay, here's the Zapruder film. It was donated by a guy in Dallas, which was obviously not true. And I've just brought it over from Hawkeyeworks, where it was developed. Okay. Now, this is, a guy named that claims to be Secret Service, but he can't be. It's just no reasonable possibility. Now, why do I say that? Well, because Hawkeyeworks was such a top secret operation that there's just no reasonable possibility that the CIA is going to share that with the Secret Service. Then the secret's out, because, how do you rely on them to keep it secret? As long as you keep the secret compressed or compacted, wrapped up within the CIA itself, secret's going to be pretty solid. But once you start sharing it with an outside agency, that's not going to necessarily be the case. And so I don't believe there's any reasonable possibility whatsoever that they would have shared this part of the operation. It's too important. It's too incriminating that they're going to be getting Secret Service agents as part of this operation. Now, remember, they've got to coordinate with C.D. Jackson. And he's the head of Life magazine. He's their asset there, Operation Mockingbird and so forth. And so they would have been coordinating, the CIA would have been coordinating with Jackson. And so to me, it's a virtual certainty that the people that would have gotten that film in Chicago and taken it back to Washington would have been CIA officials. And the same thing, that they would have then taken it to Hawkeyeworks, and there's just no way that the CIA is going to tell the Secret Service agent, hey, well, we've got this secret operation at Hawkeyeworks and called Hawkeyeworks. It's located there in Rochester. This is the way you get there. No chance of that. So the Secret Service agent that brings back the film on Sunday, that calls himself Bill Smith, I don't think there's any reasonable doubt but that he's Secret Service as well. Now, let me continue focusing on Brugioni for a minute. What we're going to do with this Zapruder film is we're going to analyze it in parts. We've analyzed that frame to a certain extent, the headshot frame, in the context of what Dino Brugioni saw when he saw the original film. So his statement negates the authenticity of the extant film, the film that purports to be the original. He's clearly saying that the headshot had multiple frames. As of right now, the extant film has only one, frame 313, and that's it. And then he saw that huge cone going up that he says was just shocking. And so that's pretty persuasive evidence that that's not the same film that he saw. It's an altered version of the film. But look, then we're going to go to the back of the head part. Remember, we still got to deal with that, because that's the part that got us into all this. You know, when we were getting ready to go to the jury with the fraudulent autopsy, and the CIA shows up with a Zapruder film and says, "Your Honor, look, the back of the head is intact, so it matches our photograph here." So we still need to examine that, and we will. We need to examine other aspects of this film. For example, the turn onto Elm Street, which we'll do in a few minutes, and then as the motorcade starts moving down Elm Street, what happens there? So we're going to examine those in pieces. Okay, we've looked at how Brugioni saw the headshot there. We're going to examine the back of the head problem. We're going to examine the turn, and then we're going to examine what happened as the motorcade starts heading down Elm Street. But before we get to that, I want to focus on another aspect of Dino Brugioni. That you'll recall that he had a special way of doing briefing boards. He was called the briefing board czar at NITPIC, as I indicated earlier, the National Photographic Interpretation Center. And he would do these things on these, they weren't poster boards, they were like fortified boards. And then he'd put a hinge in the middle, and he had a certain way of labeling. And that was the way he did things, and that's the way he did things in this particular case on the Saturday night operation. Keep in mind, the Saturday night operation was totally compartmentalized from the Sunday night operation. The Sunday night operation was headed by Homer McMahon, and they had a different way of preparing briefing boards than the way Dino Brugioni prepared briefing boards. They didn't put the hinge in the middle where the two sides could just close in on each other. So Douglas Horne, in his interview with Brugioni, shows him pictures of the briefing boards for the Sunday night operation, and because those were retained. And Brugioni says, no, those are not my briefing boards. That's not the way I make briefing boards. I do them a certain way, and he says, I don't label them like that. And then, of course, he had his hinge in the middle, and these didn't have hinges. They're just separate boards. So we can tell by that statement there that we're dealing with two separate operations. Now, what about Dino Brugioni's briefing boards? Well, that's kind of an interesting story. That back in 1975, Geraldo Rivera comes out and shows the Zapruder film. Remember, they sequestered it. Life magazine did. They said they were going to keep it hidden forever. They wanted to protect America from seeing the violence in the film. And all of a sudden, Geraldo Rivera comes out with this thing with the the violent back and to the left, that when Kennedy's hit in the head, he's flung backwards and to the left. And that's in Oliver Stone's movie, JFK, where Kevin Costner says, back and to the left to the jury. Well, the people that saw the original Zapruder film never remarked about that. And yet that's the most remarkable aspect of the film, if you see it today. And but they didn't talk about that. Instead, it's like Brugioni. He's got this huge cone shooting up into the sky. That's what they found shocking. Well, as a result of Rivera's showing this film, there's obviously a lot of controversy because people had never felt good about the official lone nut, communist former Marine assassin who had no purported motive to assassinate the president, who just happened to be at the right place at the right time, said, I think I'll assassinate a president today. And very few people really felt comfortable about this. And so then Rivera comes up with this film that's been kept hidden for 12 years that shows his violent back and to the left, and now people are really suspicious. Like, that's a frontal shot. I mean, everybody who looks at the film says, that's a frontal shot. What the heck is going on here? So they form a Rockefeller Commission to investigate the CIA and the CIA's misdeeds, including state-sponsored assassinations. Then there's the Church Committee to investigate CIA misdeeds, including all their regime change operations, or at least some of them, including some of their assassinations. That leads to the House Select Committee on Assassinations that reopens the whole investigation of the Kennedy assassination. But when this Rockefeller Commission was meeting, the commission got wind of the fact that the CIA might have had some contact with the Zapruder film. And they inquired about this. And so the word got put out within the CIA, if you have any assassination-related matters, bring them over to such and such office. And so Brugioni does this. He's got his briefing boards, and he goes into the head of Nitpick, a guy named John Hicks, Arthur Lundahl, his previous boss, who had known about these two compartmentalized operations. Undoubtedly, he was the guy that orchestrated them. He was the overseer in all this. So Brugioni takes the new director, his briefing boards to the new director, who goes into a fit. The guy goes ballistic. What the heck are you doing with these words? And he's just profanity-laden, screaming, get those things out of here. And Brugioni was like mystified, like, what the heck's going on? I mean, the guy's just innocent. He just says, here's my briefing boards. For him, there's just one Zapruder film, and these are my briefing boards. And all of a sudden, this guy, profanity-laced reaction, and get him out of here. And so Brugioni ends up taking him, I think, to the CIA director's office and just drops him off. But always mystified as to what was going on, because nobody ever explained it to him. And well, what this guy Hicks did is Hicks goes to the Rockefeller Commission, and he doesn't take Brugioni's briefing boards. You see, he only takes the Sunday night briefing boards, but he doesn't relinquish their possession. He just wants to show them to him, but obviously makes the case about why the CIA should continue retaining these instead of putting them in the public record as part of the Rockefeller Commission hearings. And what's going on here is that there's a lot of public attention now because Rivera, they're raising questions about what's going on, the back into the left movement, and so forth. So if these briefing boards are suddenly released into the public record, the news media is going to get a hold of them. They're going to be splattered all over the front page of the Washington Post or whatever, where Dino Brugioni could see them, which would cause him to think, what the heck, where'd these come from? What's this all about? And start asking questions. So this guy Hicks finagles things so that he doesn't have to relinquish possession of the Sunday night briefing boards to the Rockefeller Commission. The CIA retains possession of those things. But that something's going on here in a nefarious way because he could have taken both sets of briefing boards. And the way he gives his report to the Rockefeller Commission, he makes it sound like there was just one meeting, where the briefing boards were prepared. In other words, the Sunday night meeting. He doesn't disclose that it's two compartmentalized operations. So that's another way that there's something nefarious going on here, something fraudulent. Another aspect of this kind of interesting, that as we talked about earlier, you've got the JFK Records Collection Act that comes into existence, I think in 1992, in response to Oliver Stone's movie where he pointed out to people they're still keeping their records secret to the year 2029 or something like that. And there was outrage, and that puts pressure on Congress to enact this law that mandates that their records have to be released. And then they've got the ARRB that is going to be collecting all these records, putting them in the National Archives and so forth. Well, if there's ever an assassination-related record, it would be the Zapruder film. And so if these operations are on the up and up, there at the CIA at Nitpick, the Saturday night operation, compartmentalized, the Sunday night operation, compartmentalized, the Rochester operation, there would be login sheets, there would be member after action reports, they would be writing reports about their activities, there would be a documentation as to what went on here. Nothing nothing has ever been turned over to the ARRB or the National Archives relating to any aspect of this operation. Nothing. Total secrecy. And to me, that's, again, powerful circumstantial evidence that there's something nefarious going on here. Because one might say, oh, well, they're just investigating the crime, the assassination. Well, except for the fact that they don't have jurisdiction. Remember, this is a state murder case. The military, the CIA, the Secret Service, the Justice Department, none of them had jurisdiction over this case. So how can they have anything to do with a criminal investigation? And if they are investigating the crime, it's got to be the strangest investigation ever, because they never turn over the results excuse me, of their investigation to the Warren Commission, to the House Select Committee, the Rockefeller Commission, the ARRB. Strangest criminal investigation in history. So in an overall context, you've got some interesting, incriminating circumstances here. You've got the military that's conducting the fraudulent autopsy on Friday night. Okay? And now, is it only the military? Well, from all accounts, but my hunch is that there's CIA people there. Remember, somebody orders Fink to not dissect that neck wound. Well, he says he didn't remember who it is. My hunch is CIA, some top medical official, expert within the CIA, because those are the smart people. They know what's necessary to conduct this fraudulent autopsy. My hunch is that they're overseeing the operation. The men in suits that are coming in that hearse, that are bringing in the shipping casket at 6:35 p.m., I'm convinced that they have to be CIA also. They could be Secret Service, but there are clearly some elements of dark side activity within the Secret Service in this assassination. But my hunch is that the CIA was playing a role there, an important role in overwatching, supervising, monitoring, and directing the fraudulent autopsy. But clearly the CIA is up to its necks in the next day, Saturday and Sunday, on the weekend of the assassination, with this fraudulent film. Now, okay, let's move on here. We've examined the head wound to a certain extent, given Dino Brugione's statement. We'll return to it, especially on the back of the head wound. But I want to talk about the turn here onto Elm Street. Because if you look at the Zapruder film that's in existence today, it doesn't show the presidential limousine making the turn onto Elm Street. Okay, here's how it worked. The whole motorcade is coming down Main Street. This Main Street's downtown Dallas, the skyscrapers there. You had tons of people out on the sidewalks cheering the president, which was rather odd because Dallas was a right-wing conservative city. But there were liberals in Texas, not a lot, but it could be many of those workers were liberals that are out on the street, or could be just people showing respect for the president. But it was cheering crowds. In fact, Mrs. Conley, Nellie Conley, the governor's wife, even turns to Kennedy right before the shots start ringing out, saying, "You can't say Dallas doesn't love you, Mr. President." I mean, that was the kind of outpouring of affection he was getting. So the motorcade's proceeding in a somewhat westerly direction on Main Street. Then it hits Dealey Plaza. And this is the end of the motorcade. It takes a right turn onto Houston Street, goes about a block, and then takes a left turn onto Elm Street, where the assassination took place. The turn onto Elm Street, from Houston Street left onto Elm Street, violated fundamental protocols of the Secret Service. Now, obviously, this wasn't the only protocol they violated. I mean, for example, the windows. I mean, the protocols call for sealing windows in these high-story buildings, monitoring them. If somebody opens a window, you can stop the motorcade, radio ahead, tell them to stop till we get this checked out. They didn't do any of that. But this turn, it was such at an angle. Keep in mind, the limousine's huge, it's long. So it was at such an angle that witnesses said that it actually went up on the sidewalk. And if it didn't go actually up on the sidewalk as it's making this wide left-hand turn, it got pretty close to getting on the sidewalk. But in any event, the car really had to slow down just to creep around this turn. And obviously, the reason it violated the protocols of the Secret Service is because it's going so slow that it makes it a perfect opportunity to assassinate the president. So they don't want that going on. So the thing makes the turn and then comes down Elm Street, and then the shots start being fired. Now, that turn is not in the Zapruder film. And obviously, if it was in there, it wouldn't look good. I mean, it would look pretty bad, as a matter of fact, because obviously when it's coming out of the turn, it's going to be going real slow as a direct result of the turn. And so it stands to reason that people who are involved in this assassination would not want a film to be showing this slow, angular type turn that essentially might even be going up on the sidewalk to make it. Well, the implication, of course, is that in the altered copy of the Zapruder film, they deleted the frames relating to the turn. Now, if you look at the Zapruder film today, it's really interesting, and it's in my opinion very incriminating that it shows the motorcycle. The film starts out showing the motorcycle cops that are at the head of the motorcade, making the turn from Houston Street onto Elm Street. And then there's a jump. I mean, it's like this sudden jump that looks really weird when you're watching the film. And the jump all of a sudden shows the presidential limousine. Just pops out of nowhere. It's right there, partway down Elm Street. So, in other words, it doesn't show the presidential limousine making the turn. It just has the motorcycle cops making the turn, and then, bam, jump to the presidential limousine halfway down Elm Street or partway down Elm Street. Now, the explanation that Abraham Zapruder's granddaughter, Alexandra Zapruder, pointed out in her book 26 Seconds was that Zapruder obviously was concerned about running out of film, and that he wanted to make sure he didn't run out of film, and so that's why he waited to start filming the presidential limousine partway down Elm Street, so make sure he doesn't run out of film. I find that extremely problematic. I mean, remember, this guy is a professional home movie maker as you'd ever find. He'd been making home movies forever. This was his passion as a hobby. It wasn't his occupation, but it was his passion as a hobby. And he had this top-of-the-line Kodak camera. If anybody knew how much film he needed, it would be Abraham Zapruder. And as it was, he films all the way for the limousine passing him by, and then all the way as it's headed down to Parkland Hospital. But here's the thing. If that scenario is correct, he would have known that in advance. He would have said, I might not have enough film here, and so I'm going to wait till the limousine gets partway down Elm Street before I start filming, right? I mean, that's just logical. Well, then why start filming the motorcycle cops? Does that make any sense? Now, remember, y'all are the jury. I mean, that's what we're hypothesizing here, that you guys are the jury. And I guarantee you that in every courtroom in the land, before you go back to the jury room, the judge is going to say, your decision has to be based on the evidence, but you don't leave your common sense behind. You take your common sense back to the jury room with you. And when I practice law, I would remind jurors of that. That what I learned about the jury system practicing law, I did a lot of criminal and civil and jury trials, both state and federal court, is that jurors may not understand all the complexities of a case, a very highly technical case, but they've got an innate sense of right and wrong, of justice and injustice. And I would remind them that they have a right to use their common sense. And so commonsensically, if this man, the amateur professional has decided in advance, because obviously he would make this decision in advance. He wouldn't start recording the cops as they're making the turn and say, oh my gosh, I may run out of film. I think I better stop. No, he would know that in advance. So he would say, he just put his camera down and say, I'm not going to film anything until they get partly down Elm Street. I mean, it's just common sense. But there are those cops making the turn. And then all of a sudden this jump to where the limousine's halfway down Elm Street. So is there any evidence, direct evidence, other than just common sense? Is there any evidence itself that establishes that this is an altered film with respect to the deletion of frames that show that turn? We'll examine that in the next episode. I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is episode 17 of the JFK assassination 60 years later.